He was a former Navy SEAL who chose the quiet edge of the forest over a life of war. But one autumn evening, smoke rose where it shouldn't. Inside a burning house, he found a dying German shepherd and her 6 newborn puppies, caged, starving, and meant to vanish without a trace. What he uncovered wasn't an accident, but cruelty hidden behind silence. And the lives depending on him had only moments left. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. Autumn had settled fully over the outskirts of Pine Hollow, a small mountain town tucked against the eastern edge of Oregon's national forest. By evening, the air carried the clean, sharp scent of fallen leaves and damp soil, and the hills glowed faintly amber beneath a sky bruised with low-moving clouds. A thin wind threaded through the trees, whispering through red maples and yellow aspens, stirring leaves that had already begun to rot back into the earth. It was the kind of quiet that arrived only after summer had truly let go. Caleb moved through that quiet with practiced ease. At 29, he was young by most standards, but his posture carried a stillness that came only from discipline. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his frame lean and balanced rather than bulky. His dark hair was cropped short, practical, and his face, clean-shaven, angular, wore the calm focus of someone accustomed to assessing risks before others even noticed them. He had completed his Navy SEAL, contract honorably, and chosen not to re-enlist, not because he was broken and not because he was running, but because he had learned exactly where his skills mattered most to him. These days, Caleb worked seasonal contracts with the county, monitoring forest safety, surveying fire risk zones, assisting with controlled burns and emergency response when the weather turned dry. He lived modestly, not far from the tree line, in a cabin that served more as a staging point than a retreat. The forest wasn't an escape. It was simply where his work made sense. That evening, he was finishing a routine perimeter check when he saw it. Smoke, not the wild, fast-rising column of a forest fire. This smoke was different. Low, dense, almost deliberate, it pressed sideways through the trees instead of climbing, dark and heavy, clinging to the undergrowth as if reluctant to be seen. Caleb stopped mid-step. His eyes narrowed, tracking the movement of the smoke against the wind. It wasn't spreading. It wasn't racing uphill. And it wasn't behaving like anything sparked by lightning or careless campers. Controlled, he murmured under his breath, or something meant to look that way. He adjusted his pack automatically. Inside were tools chosen with intention: a compact fire extinguisher, a heavy-duty flashlight, a pry bar, and a serrated rescue knife worn smooth along the grip. He checked the wind again, shifted his approach to move upwind, and marked his exit route with a quick glance over his shoulder. Old habits. Quiet, efficient, unquestioned. The forest thickened as he moved deeper. Pines crowded overhead, their needles muting his footsteps. The smoke grew stronger, stinging his eyes now, and with it came the faint crackle of fire. Too contained, too localized. Then he heard it. A sharp, frantic sound cut through the rustle of leaves. Barking, not distant, not territorial. It was high-pitched, overlapping, panicked, layered voices colliding in desperation. Caleb froze. That wasn't the sound of free animals. He broke into a controlled jog, weaving through trees until the forest opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a structure barely visible through smoke and flame. A one-story building, half swallowed by shadow, its windows boarded over with mismatched planks. Fire crawled along the roofline, licking greedily at dry wood. An abandoned house. At least, that was what it wanted to appear to be. The barking intensified as he drew closer. It came from inside. Caleb didn't hesitate. He circled the structure once, fast and low, checking angles. No vehicles, no signs of recent habitation, no trash, no tools, no personal effects. That alone was wrong. Fires didn't just start in places with nothing to lose. He forced the front door with the pry bar, coughing as smoke poured out in a thick wave. Inside, the heat pressed down hard, and the smell hit him next. Metal, ash, and something sharp and sour beneath it. The barking exploded into chaos. Lined along the walls were cages, metal cages. Several stood empty, their doors twisted open, the floor beneath them scorched. They weren't improvised or makeshift. These were industrial, reinforced steel, welded joints, bolted to the concrete, built to hold something strong. At the far end of the room was one last cage. Inside it lay a German shepherd. She was large but frighteningly thin, her black and tan coat dulled by soot and neglect. Her chest heaved with labored breaths, each one rattling painfully. Pressed against her belly were 6 tiny puppies, barely more than dark shapes tangled together, their eyes still sealed shut, their small bodies trembling as they cried. The mother lifted her head weakly when she saw him. Her ears twitched. There was fear there, but also something else. Pleading. Caleb moved instantly. He didn't waste time trying to extinguish the entire fire. The flames were already too established, the structure compromised. He made the only decision that mattered: save lives, leave the rest. He tested the cage, bolted down as he'd expected. Sparks fell from the ceiling as the roof groaned above him. He braced the pry bar against the bolts, muscles tightening as he wrenched them loose one by one. Smoke burned his lungs, but his hands were steady. The cage came free. The building shuddered violently. Caleb crouched, slid his arms beneath the cage, and lifted. The weight surprised him. Not just metal and dogs, but responsibility. The mother let out a low, strained sound as the cage shifted, curling her body protectively around her pups. Caleb adjusted his grip, angling the cage to shield them from falling embers. He ran. Behind him, the ceiling collapsed with a roar. Heat blasted against his back as he burst through the doorway, lungs screaming for clean air. He didn't stop until he'd cleared the tree line, until the ground dipped and the flames were safely behind him. The house folded in on itself seconds later, collapsing in a shower of sparks and ash. Caleb set the cage down carefully. The German shepherd lay still for a moment, chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The puppies huddled closer, their cries fading into weak whimpers. He knelt beside them, pulling his jacket free and draping it partially over the cage to block the chill creeping in with the night air. Only then did he let himself take in the details. There were no beds inside the building, no food bowls, no clothing, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. Just cages. Caleb reached into his pocket and took out his phone. He snapped several photos. Of the collapsed structure, the cages visible through the ruins, the bolts embedded in concrete. Not out of curiosity, but habit. Documentation mattered. Patterns mattered. Whatever had happened here wasn't an accident. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of burned wood deeper into the forest. Caleb looked back once at the smoldering remains of the house, then down at the animals he'd pulled from it. "You're safe," he said quietly, though he didn't know yet how true that was. The German shepherd met his gaze, eyes dull but alert, and for the first time since he'd arrived, the forest fell completely silent. The drive into Pine Hollow cut through darkness thickened by fog and falling leaves. The town slept early in autumn, storefronts dark, streets empty, except for the occasional porch light glowing like a watchful eye. Caleb kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other braced against the metal cage secured in the back of his truck. Every turn sent a faint rattle through the frame. Each sound tightened his jaw. The German shepherd inside the cage lay curled around her puppies, her body rigid with effort. Her breathing was uneven, shallow pulls of air that sounded wrong even to an untrained ear. The puppies whimpered weakly, their cries thin and fragile, fading whenever the truck slowed. Caleb drove faster than he liked, but not recklessly. He knew how little margin there was when bodies began to fail. The Pine Hollow Veterinary Clinic sat at the edge of town, a low building with white siding and a single illuminated sign. The yellow glow spilling from its windows cut sharply against the cold blue of the night. Caleb pulled up and leaned on the horn once, short, deliberate. The door opened almost immediately. A woman stepped out, already pulling on gloves. She was in her mid-30s, average height, with a slim but solid build shaped by long hours on her feet. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a loose knot that had begun to slip, strands clinging to her forehead. Her face was sharp-eyed and alert, exhaustion etched lightly around the eyes but held in check by focus. This was Nora Whitfield. She took in the truck, the cage, the soot on Caleb's jacket, and the way he moved, controlled, economical, in a single glance. "Bring them inside," she said. Her voice was calm, firm, not rushed. "Careful with the angle." Caleb nodded and moved without question. Together they lifted the cage, the metal biting cold through his gloves. Inside, the shepherd let out a low, strained sound, but did not struggle. Her eyes followed every movement. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and warm air. Nora guided the cage onto a stainless steel table, already pulling a heat lamp down over the puppies. "Hypothermia," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "All of them." She worked fast. Thermometer, stethoscope. Her hands were practiced, gentle but decisive. Caleb stood close, watching her face rather than the animal's, reading the small shifts in her expression. "She's in rough shape," Nora said. "Respiratory infection, severe malnutrition, and—" She paused, fingers pressing lightly along the dog's flank. "She's been bred repeatedly, too frequently. Her body hasn't recovered between litters." The shepherd's chest hitched, a wet rasp catching in her throat. Caleb stepped closer. "What do you need?" "Hold her steady," Nora said. "Just like that." He placed his hands where she indicated, firm without force. The dog's muscles trembled beneath his grip, but she did not resist. She leaned into the contact as if anchoring herself. The puppies were next. Nora worked methodically, drying them, checking gums, administering fluids in precise amounts. Their bodies were frighteningly light, bones too easy to feel beneath skin and downy fur. One of them, smallest of the six, suddenly went still, its cries cut off mid-breath. Nora froze. "Pulse," she said sharply. Caleb's fingers were already there. He shook his head once. "Fading." "All right," Nora said. "No panic, no wasted words. I need you to stimulate. Gentle. Count with me." Caleb followed her instructions exactly. 2 fingers, rhythmic pressure. His breathing slowed deliberately, matching the pace she set. "1," she said. 2. The puppy's body twitched faintly. "Again." They didn't look at each other. They didn't need to. After a long, taut moment, the puppy gasped. A thin, desperate sound, but alive. Nora exhaled slowly. "Good," she said. "Stay with me." The crisis passed, but the tension lingered in the air like static. Nora straightened at last, pulling her gloves free. She leaned back against the counter, studying the shepherd again. Her brow furrowed. Not with concern alone, but with something sharper. "This isn't a backyard breeder," she said. Caleb looked up. "Why?" She gestured toward the dog's neck. "There's scarring here, where a microchip should be." She met his eyes. "It was removed, not surgically, manually." She moved along the dog's underside, careful not to cause pain. "These marks, see them?" Repeated restraint. "And the breeding pattern doesn't follow legal schedules. Whoever had her didn't care if she survived." Caleb's jaw tightened. He thought of the cages bolted to concrete, the boarded windows, the fire that had come too clean, too contained. "That house wasn't a home," he said. No food, no beds, just cages. Nora nodded slowly. That tracks. She washed her hands, the sound of running water filling the brief silence. When she turned back, her expression was thoughtful, guarded. "I'm not calling this in yet," she said. "Not until I know more, but I want you to understand something." Caleb waited. "People who do this don't like attention," she continued, "and they don't burn down property unless they think it's necessary." He met her gaze evenly. "I didn't go looking for anything." "I know," she said, and then, after a beat, "But you found it anyway." They worked through the night. Nora set the shepherd up with oxygen and antibiotics. She placed the puppies in a warmed enclosure, monitoring their temperature minute by minute. Caleb stayed, cleaning equipment, holding animals when needed, moving where she pointed without hesitation. He didn't ask questions he didn't need answers to. He didn't talk about himself. He focused on what was in front of him. At some point near dawn, the shepherd's breathing eased. Not good, but better. Nora leaned against the counter again, fatigue finally breaking through her composure. She looked at Caleb more closely now. The soot-stained jacket, the steady hands, the quiet awareness. "You've done this before," she said. "Not this," he replied, "but enough." She accepted that. She had learned long ago when not to push. Outside, the sky lightened from black to gray. The clinic's yellow lights dimmed slightly as the automatic system adjusted to the coming day. The puppies slept, pressed together. Alive. Nora covered them with a fresh blanket. "They're not out of danger," she said. "None of them are? But they've got a chance." Caleb nodded once. That was enough. Night settled into Pine Hollow with a soft, relentless persistence. The clinic's windows glowed long after the town's lights went dark, their yellow warmth pushing back the cold that crept in from the forest. Inside, machines hummed and clicked, steady and unforgiving, measuring breaths and heartbeats that refused to follow a predictable rhythm. The German shepherd lay on her side beneath an oxygen hood, her chest lifting with visible effort. Clear tubing ran from the tank to the mask, fogging faintly with each exhale. Antibiotics dripped through a line taped carefully along her foreleg, the rhythm of the pump matching the slow cadence of survival. Her eyes were open now, tracking movement in the room with a guarded, exhausted awareness. She was not stable. Not yet. The puppies remained in a heated enclosure near the back, 6 small bodies curled together like punctuation marks at the end of a fragile sentence. Their eyes were sealed shut, their movements minimal, tiny ribs rising, and falling beneath skin that still held the faint chill of the night they'd been pulled from fire. The hum of the warming unit was constant, a mechanical promise that the cold would not be allowed back in. Caleb sat in a chair pulled close to the shepherd's side, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He had removed his jacket and folded it over the back of the chair. The soot stains remained, dark smudges that refused to fade no matter how much time passed. He hadn't gone home. Sleep came in fragments, 10 minutes at a time, sometimes less. He dozed sitting upright, waking at the slightest change in sound. Each hiss of oxygen, each shift of weight from the dog, pulled him back to full awareness without effort. It wasn't vigilance driven by fear. It was habit, a way of being. Nora moved through the clinic quietly, her steps measured, efficient. She checked vitals, adjusted flow rates, recorded numbers in neat, compact handwriting. Her shoulders were tense but controlled, the posture of someone who had learned to function under prolonged pressure without wasting energy on panic. "She's holding," Nora said softly, glancing at the monitor. "That's all I can promise tonight." Caleb nodded. He didn't ask for more. At some point past midnight, the shepherd shifted. A low sound escaped her throat. Half whine, half breath. Caleb leaned closer without touching. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. His voice was steady, unadorned. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it was with purpose. The dog's eyes flicked toward him. She studied his face for a long moment, then let her head rest again. He stayed. Hours passed like that. Numbers stabilized, dipped, rose again. Dawn threatened and retreated behind cloud cover. Outside, leaves scraped along the pavement, driven by a wind that carried the smell of damp earth and smoke long since extinguished. Caleb spoke again, softer this time. "I'm going to call you Ash," he said. The name settled into the quiet. It wasn't sentimental. It was factual, a marker of what remained after something had burned. Ash's ears twitched faintly. Nora paused near the counter, watching the exchange from a distance. She didn't interrupt. She understood the value of names, the way they tethered intention to action. Caleb wasn't lonely in the way people expected loneliness to look. He didn't pace. He didn't fill silence with noise. He simply occupied it, structured and calm, as if quiet were a tool he'd learned to use rather than something that pressed in on him. The clinic door chimed shortly after dusk the following evening. Nora looked up, surprised. They weren't open. The sign outside clearly stated emergency access only, and even then, calls came first. The man who stepped inside was tall and narrow, wearing a faded green jacket that had seen too many seasons. His hair was light, thinning at the temples. His face unremarkable enough to be forgotten, easily. He smiled with his mouth, but his eyes didn't join in. They flicked around the room quickly, taking inventory. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to interrupt. Saw the lights on." Nora set her pen down. "Clinic's closed," she replied evenly. "If you need help, you'll have to call." The man nodded, lingering near the doorway. "Yeah, I just heard something." Caleb straightened slightly in his chair. "Heard what?" Nora asked. "Dogs," the man said. "Someone said a truck came through late, from the woods?" There it was, casual, careless, a question shaped like an accident. Nora's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled lightly against the counter. "We treat animals here," she said. "That's not unusual." The man shrugged. "Figured I'd ask. Folks get curious." Caleb stood. He didn't move toward the man. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood, tall and silent, presence filling the space without effort. The man's gaze shifted to him, lingering just a second too long. "You work here?" he asked. "No," Caleb said. The word landed with quiet finality. The man smiled again, thinner this time. "All right, no trouble meant." He stepped back, the bell chiming softly as the door closed behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. Nora exhaled slowly. "That wasn't nothing," she said. Caleb shook his head once. "No." She crossed her arms, gaze fixed on the door. "People don't come asking questions like that unless they think they're owed answers." He returned to his seat beside Ash, eyes still alert. "Someone noticed the fire," he said, "or the truck, or both." Nora nodded. "And they don't want anyone else noticing." The shepherd stirred, a low sound rumbling in her chest. Caleb reached out then, resting his hand gently against the edge of the oxygen hood where she could see it. He didn't touch her. He let her know he was there. "You're not going anywhere," he murmured. Ash's breathing steadied just slightly. Nora watched them both. "We keep everything quiet," she said. "No reports yet. No calls we don't need to make." Caleb met her gaze. "That's fine." But something had shifted. The clinic felt smaller now, the walls thinner, the sense of waiting sharpened, no longer passive. Whatever had burned in the woods hadn't been erased by fire. It had only changed shape. Outside, the night pressed closer. Listening, late autumn reshaped the forest quietly. Weeks passed without ceremony, marked not by calendars, but by subtle changes. Mornings that cut colder, leaves thinning from gold to rust beneath the trees, the sky paling earlier each afternoon. Pine Hollow moved at its usual unhurried pace, but beyond town limits, the woods shifted with a sense of waiting. Inside the veterinary clinic, the waiting began to ease. Ash no longer needed the oxygen hood. The tubing had been removed days earlier, leaving only faint impressions in the fur along her muzzle. She still moved carefully, conserving strength, but her breathing had steadied into a rhythm that no longer scraped or rattled. Her eyes, once dulled by exhaustion, now tracked movement with guarded alertness. The puppies had changed the most. 6 small bodies now filled the enclosure with uncoordinated life. Their eyes had opened, dark, curious, unfocused at first, then gradually sharper with each passing day. They toppled over one another, learning how legs worked, paws skidding on blankets, noses bumping into walls, and siblings alike. Their whimpers had softened into exploratory yips, sounds that filled the clinic with fragile insistence. Caleb watched them from the floor, crouched low, forearms resting on his knees. He didn't reach for them unless invited. When one tumbled toward him, he steadied it with 2 fingers and let it go again. Ash observed everything. Her body angled protectively between him and the enclosure, but she did not growl. Her trust came slowly, deliberately. Nora stood nearby, arms folded, clipboard tucked against her side. Fatigue still lived in her posture, but relief had begun to edge it out. "They're ready," she said. "Not today, but soon." Caleb nodded. He had already prepared. His cabin sat deeper in the forest than most people would choose, a structure built for function rather than comfort. Over the past weeks, he had cleaned and reinforced it with quiet precision. He insulated. The spare room installed heat lamps, lined the floor with washable mats. Outside, he cleared brush and checked sightlines, not for threats, but for safety. The woods offered shelter and risk in equal measure. He respected both. Nora knelt beside Ash, checking her vitals one last time before release. "You'll need to bring them back for follow-ups," she said. "And if anything changes, anything, you call me." "I will," Caleb said. She hesitated, then added, "This isn't just about health anymore." He understood. The call came 2 days later. A county official requested Nora's presence at the municipal building. The tone was formal, non-negotiable. Caleb drove her there in silence. The road wound down from the forest into town, passing modest homes and closed storefronts. Pine Hollow looked unchanged, but beneath the surface, conversations had begun to shift. Inside the building, the air was stale with old paper and coffee. 3 people waited in a small conference room. The first was Deputy Harold Keene, a man in his late 40s with a weathered face and tired eyes. He carried himself with careful neutrality, neither aggressive nor warm. Years of navigating small-town tensions had taught him caution. Beside him sat Elaine Porter, a county records analyst. She was slight, sharp-featured, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her fingers moved constantly, tapping against a folder thick with documents. She looked like someone who trusted data more than people. The third man leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. Marcus Bell, State Agricultural Enforcement. Taller than the others, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with a calm intensity that suggested he rarely raised his voice and almost never needed to. Nora took a seat. Caleb remained standing near the door, silent. Elaine slid a photograph across the table. It showed the remains of the burned structure in the forest, the cage bolts still visible in the concrete slab beneath the ash. "You recognize this," she said. "Yes," Nora replied. "I've seen the animals that came from it." Marcus spoke next. "We traced partial microchip records from the shepherd. The chip was damaged, but not destroyed. Enough data remained to identify the issuing registry." Elaine nodded. The registry points to a breeder that shut down operations 2 years ago. On paper? Deputy Keene cleared his throat. Unofficially, complaints never stopped. Dogs disappearing, buyers paying cash. No inspections. Nora's jaw tightened. And the fire? Marcus met her gaze. Deliberate, accelerant traces. The structure wasn't residential. It was a holding site, likely the last one still active. Elaine added, "We matched your medical notes, breeding scars, malnutrition, to reports from neighboring counties. Same patterns, same breed." Silence settled over the room. "So the animals were evidence," Nora said. "Yes," Marcus replied. "Living evidence." Caleb shifted slightly, not closer, not away, simply present. Deputy Keene glanced toward him. "Some people would have looked the other way," he said quietly. "Fires happen in the woods?" Caleb didn't respond. Marcus continued. "We're moving carefully. There are individuals with influence who would prefer this not to surface. Businesses tied to the trade, money that doesn't want questions." Nora folded her hands together. "And the dogs?" "They stay protected," Marcus said, "which is why we're asking for cooperation. Discretion." Caleb spoke for the first time. "They'll be off-grid." Marcus nodded once. "That helps." The return to the cabin happened at dawn. Ash entered first, stepping onto forest soil with cautious dignity. She paused, nose lifting as she sampled the air. Pine, damp leaves, distant smoke, long gone. The puppies followed in a chaotic wave, tumbling from the crate, paws sinking into leaf litter. They sniffed. Everything sneezed repeatedly, then scattered in short, clumsy bursts. Caleb watched from the doorway. The cabin stood solid and unremarkable among the trees, weathered wood blending into the forest's muted palette. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Inside, warmth waited. Ash circled once, then twice. She stopped near Caleb, looking up at him. Not in submission, not in challenge, but with a quiet acknowledgement. "This is yours," he said softly. Life settled into new rhythms. Caleb avoided town when possible. He kept his movements predictable, his presence unremarkable. When unfamiliar vehicles slowed near the forest road, he noted it. When a figure lingered too long at the trailhead, he adjusted his routines. No confrontations came, no threats voiced aloud. Protection, he understood, did not always require force. Sometimes it required patience. Nora visited when she could, bringing supplies and updates. Pressure mounted around her, questions from colleagues, subtle, reminders about professional boundaries. She handled it with the same precision she brought to medicine, offering only what was necessary, withholding the rest. The truth had begun to surface, but it moved carefully, like water seeping through stone. One afternoon, as leaves fell in a slow, steady rain, Caleb stood outside the cabin, watching the puppies stumble through a carpet of red and gold. Ash lay nearby, alert but calm, her gaze sweeping the forest. The fire had tried to erase what it contained. It hadn't succeeded. The forest released its grip gently. The last weeks of autumn arrived with clear mornings and amber light that slid between the trees like a promise kept. Frost no longer lingered on the cabin steps. The wind still carried a bite, but it no longer cut. It moved with intention now, stirring leaves into soft spirals that settled across the clearing and against the cabin walls. Ash stood at the edge of the tree line, her posture relaxed but alert. Her coat had regained its sheen, the black and tan catching the sun as she lifted her head and tasted the air. The heaviness that once lived in her breath was gone. She moved with quiet strength, muscles working smoothly beneath healthy weight, eyes bright and steady. Caleb watched from the porch, a mug cooling in his hands. The puppies? No longer quite puppies. Tumbled across the clearing in uneven bursts of energy. 4 of them chased one another through leaf piles, their clumsy coordination now turning into something more confident. 2 remained closer to Ash, mirroring her movements instinctively, pausing when she paused, ears lifting when hers did. They had changed, all of them. The resolution came without spectacle. There were no sirens, no headlines pinned to bulletin boards. The dismantling of the operation happened through paperwork, inspections, seized records, and quiet arrests that took place far from Pine Hollow's main road. Properties were shuttered, licenses revoked, transport routes exposed and cut cleanly. The forest exhaled. Families arrived in measured intervals, guided by referrals and careful screening. They came with hands open and voices lowered, aware they were being trusted with something fragile. Nora stood beside Caleb during each meeting, her presence grounding and precise, her questions thorough without being cold. The first adoption took place beneath a maple that had shed most of its leaves. A middle-aged couple from a neighboring county knelt patiently as a small shepherd pup sniffed, their boots, tail wagging uncertainly. The woman had gentle eyes and a laugh that came easily. The man moved slowly, deliberately, as if he understood how trust worked. They didn't rush. The pup chose them. 2 more followed days later, leaving with a retired ranger and his teenage daughter. The girl's freckles stood out against flushed cheeks, her smile wide but restrained as she wrapped her jacket carefully around the small, warm body tucked against her chest. She listened intently as Caleb explained feeding schedules and early training, nodding with the seriousness of someone ready to be responsible. The 4th left with a young couple who lived near the coast. They promised space, time, and patience. Caleb believed them. Ash watched each departure without distress. She nosed each pup gently before letting them go, then returned to her place near the cabin, calm and resolute. She understood, in her way, that this was not loss. The 2 remaining pups stayed. Caleb had noticed it, early, the way they responded to sound, the way their focus sharpened when Ash lifted her head, the way they moved toward fallen branches and unfamiliar scents with curiosity rather than fear. He didn't push. He observed. Nora confirmed it with a nod. "They've got the instinct," she said, "and the temperament." Training began with simple structure. Not drills, not commands barked into the air. Just routine. Morning walks along established trails. Exposure to different ground textures. Controlled introductions to equipment. The pups learned through watching Ash first, mimicking her calm assessment of space and sound. Caleb worked beside them, not above them. He set boundaries without force, corrected gently, rewarded consistency. The forest provided everything else. Unpredictable terrain, shifting weather, scents layered deep and old. Word spread. By late autumn, the county approved his application. The paperwork arrived folded neatly in an envelope stamped with official seals. Caleb read it once, then set it on the table beside his tools. The Forest Canine Rescue Point was registered. It wasn't large. It wasn't funded by grants or sponsorships. It was a clearing, a cabin, a training schedule, and a promise to respond when the forest demanded it. Nora continued to visit, often bringing supplies or notes from town. She wore her hair looser now, the knot replaced by a low braid that slipped over one shoulder. Her clothes bore signs of long days, creased sleeves, scuffed boots. But her movements had softened, tension easing out of her frame. She never stayed overnight. She never needed to. They worked side by side when she came, sharing tasks without assigning them. Sometimes they spoke about logistics, vaccination schedules, equipment sourcing, coordination with rangers. Sometimes they spoke about nothing at all. No declarations were made, no timeline set. They let the space between moments breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped low, and painted the sky in copper and rose, Nora stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the two young dogs navigate a fallen log under Ash's supervision. Their paws slipped, corrected, adjusted. Progress measured in inches. "You built something good here," she said. Caleb followed her gaze. "It built itself." She smiled faintly. "Still takes someone to open the door." The forest grew quiet as the light faded. Crickets began their chorus. The cabin windows glowed, warm and steady, reflecting the movement inside. Bowls set out, gear hung neatly, space occupied with purpose. Ash returned to the porch and settled at Caleb's feet, her body pressed lightly against his leg. He rested his hand against her shoulder, feeling the solid warmth there. The pups followed, curling nearby, their breathing even, untroubled. Silence wrapped around them. Not empty, not cold. A silence shaped by presence. Caleb looked out toward the tree line, where shadows lengthened and stars began to pierce the darkening sky. The season was turning. Winter would come as it always did, but the cold no longer felt like a threat. Here, life had found its footing, and it intended to stay. Sometimes life doesn't change with loud miracles or perfect timing. Sometimes it changes because someone notices what others ignore, because someone chooses to stop, to look closer, and to protect what cannot protect itself. In our everyday lives, we may never walk into a burning forest or rescue lives with our own hands. But we are given quieter chances every day, to be patient instead of cruel, to help instead of turning away, to open a door instead of pretending we didn't hear the knock. Small choices, made consistently, are often what warm the coldest seasons of our lives. If this story reminded you that compassion still matters, that second chances are real, or that even broken beginnings can grow into something strong, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments what moment moved you most. Share this story with someone who might need a little warmth today. And subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the quiet bonds that change everything. Because sometimes the world doesn't need heroes who shout. It needs people who stay.